I would want to touch on the whole question of growth trends and trajectories, not in too much detail, because I think that I'd be restating the obvious to all of you. And a lot of this has been raised this morning already. We know that African countries over the past 1.5 decades have posted an impressive GDP growth rate of about 6%, nearly double the growth rates recorded in the previous decade and 4 times the current average growth rate of Europe. This was stated this morning, I'm restating it. We also know this growth pattern, while tempered by developments in the global economy, is expected to be sustained over the period of 2015 to 2018. Africa, therefore, now is the fastest growing continent in the world. And as stated this morning, it's also expected that 19 of the 30 fastest growing economies in the next 5 years will be African. These numbers clearly by themselves provide great cause for celebration. And we are upbeat as Africans about this. But we know that despite good progress in tackling extreme poverty, persisting poverty remains a pressing issue in most African countries. We also know that economic growth is often tied unequivocally to a correlating improvement in employment levels. But increases in growth in most African countries have not resulted in expected comparable increases in numbers of new jobs. We also are deeply conscious of the fact that recent growth has not benefited all groups equally and has been characterized by widening inequality. So what is inclusive growth? And there were definitions, and I think it was captured quite well. But again, allow me to restate. Inclusive growth has become a central idea in development. Inclusive growth comprises both participation and benefit sharing. And even though growth still remains the most important component of any poverty reduction attempt, it is now widely acknowledged that poverty and inequality constrain growth. This focus is in some ways an attempt to address the deficiencies of prioritizing solely on economic growth, and is an attempt to ensure that instead that the benefits of growth are more widely experienced. Equity can and should be part of the growth process. Inclusive growth should reduce poverty and inequality and benefit the most marginalized. It allows opportunities for everyone to participate in the growth process while making sure that benefits are shared. And growth that is shared contributes to making it more sustainable. We've heard the voices of entrepreneurs, of poor people that reflects the challenges that impair their conditions and limit their opportunities. So the obvious is that inclusive growth should benefit everyone while reducing disadvantages, both in terms of benefits enjoyed and especially in terms of access to opportunities for participation. So what are the dangers of growth that's not inclusive? And President Kenyatta talked about the dangers of growth that's not inclusive. Rising inequalities matter because it affects how growth acts on the well-being and poverty. And inequality has also been linked to increased economic instability, dampened growth, social unrest, and political instability. And we know that North Africa is a classic example. We've just seen what has happened in West Africa as well. Countries consider when pursuing inclusive development. And there are many elements. A vital one is how to create productive and gainful employment. And this is not new. Came up this morning as well. not new. And we need to look at better opportunities for wage and self-employment that have a significant positive impact on growth. And jobs, we know, are also transformational in providing household income, in raising economic productivity, in providing resources to invest in children's health, education, in changing social and power relationships, and providing a sense of dignity and well-being. And indeed, national development plans of many African countries recognize that growth should tap Africa's demographic dividend. And we had inputs on that this morning. So efforts to absorb young people into the productive economy will require, amongst other things, revisiting the structure and curricula of the education systems on the continent to ensure that skills match growth patterns. And this also, and sometimes entails revamping technical vocational training as an integral part of higher education. Now, aside from the interventions to improve the quality of the labor force, job-creating growth strategy may also entail structural transformation away from capital-intensive or commodity-based growth paths. And we heard some of this morning as well. Transformation is intricately intrinsically linked to the need to enhance African firms' participation in regional and global value chains by supporting not only their integration into these value chains, but also their capacity to move up the chain. In many cases, the binding constraints are infrastructural, which explain why development finance institutions, including the African Development Bank, place such strong emphasis on infrastructure development. Just give me a few more minutes, sir. Another important element of inclusive growth is addressing legislative inclusion through the revision of discriminatory laws. And such efforts are particularly relevant in the efforts to include women's benefits and participation. We heard the upbeat story of the African lions. But remember, it's the lionesses who go out to hunt. And let me say no more on that one. Because as we hunt, we want to ensure that we actually have the access, and that requires redress. So revision of gender discriminatory laws can have strong and immediate effects on women's access to finance and reduce the vulnerability to economic shocks for low-income female-headed households. Strong institutions are also important for inclusive growth. And the inclusive growth agenda requires accountability of leaders to citizens. We've heard this morning, and I just want to amplify that, it requires prudence in public finance management to support macrofinance stability and facilitate the establishment of social security systems for vulnerable members of society. It requires peace and security, for without these, economic gains are unsustainable and vulnerability of marginalized groups is exacerbated. It also requires taking a regional view to problems and solutions and enhancing regional cooperation. And President Kenyatta spoke about that as well. And this includes what is seen politically as sensitive, yet important, and that's such as the free movement of skills. We need more of this. So this forum, and I'm almost concluding, has brought together key thought leaders and policymakers to come up with innovative ideas on how to promote inclusive growth. And I can't say it better than the president has said it this morning when he said, we have not come here to invest in thinking of yesteryear, close quotes. I think he's captured it well. We've not come here to invest in thinking of yesteryear. So we've got to focus new ideas and narratives to the advancement of an inclusive economies approach with key African institutions and influences. And they are there. We also need to ensure that with the participation of thought leaders, we develop analytical and operational tools that will support Africa's journey towards broad-based economic development. Social inclusion, productive employment, and sustainable development are not straightforward byproducts of economic growth policies. And policymakers need to intentionally shape and channel market forces into context-specific interventions that may lead to large positive welfare impacts for those who are most affected by inequality and exclusion. So the key issues and questions to be addressed during the forum, they've been raised this morning. I've raised it. I'm just repeating it. How can Africa invest and promote inclusive growth? How can regional integration promote inclusive growth? How can the private sector contribute to inclusive growth? And the rest that's been raised is part of that. Our contribution as the African Development Bank has been well sketched out this morning. And I fortunately am not running the risk of things being left out, but I'd want to state the goals of our 10-year strategy are inclusive growth and sustainable economic development and transition to green growth, and not going to talk about that. The key operating priorities of the bank's strategy were carefully selected to produce outcomes that will contribute to inclusive growth, mainly through creating the environment to facilitate the creation of productive and gainful employment. I can talk about the numbers, and I'm not going to do that because I have colleagues here who are even better qualified to deal with it. But I do want to say that as we dealt with the overall strategy and our focus on infrastructure projects in energy, transport, and the water sectors that contribute to creating opportunities for employment, job creation, and social service. As we looked at and are looking at private sector development, as we're looking at governance and skills development and regional integration, we also saw cross-cutting areas as those being gender equality, agriculture and food security, and dealing with fragile states. But I think today we're not going to fill new wineskins or old wineskins with new wine. We are going to think differently and make a difference to ensure the change that will impact on all Africans. I thank you.